Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon, and I'm the Executive Director of Churches for Middle East Peace. Today is Wednesday, February 21st. This is the 138th day since the attacks by Hamas on South Israel. I wanted to share just something personally because I thought it was quite profound. I had to have surgery yesterday, and I was in the hospital, and I was thinking about the realities in Gaza and how um, I had clean water and good medical care and nurses and doctors. And um, I just kept thinking of all of the people in Gaza who have urgent needs, who don't have access to medicine and healthcare, let alone clean water. And I wanted to be sure to point out there are many organizations. We met previously with Mustafa Barghouti, who's a physician who has several medical groups in Gaza. But Doctors Without Borders is also active there. They're called Médecins Sans Frontières in French. And so I've given updates about them before, but I didn't call them Doctors Without Borders. They've been working in Gaza for 35 years and providing life-saving medical aid. They have a summary of the conditions of all of the hospitals in Gaza. And so I just wanted to give one update about the Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. It has since been evacuated. There are some staff still from Doctors Without Borders who are remaining there voluntarily. It was the main surgical center in the south. It had become the largest hospital in Gaza after Al-Shifa was brought to a standstill because of the Israeli military operations in November. The area surrounding the hospital has been under evacuation orders of Nasser Hospital since January 23rd, following weeks of intense bombing and fighting. 90% of the staff left, including some with Doctors Without Borders, though a handful decided to stay on the premises. Remaining staff have shortages of everything. They're short on anesthetics, on fuel, on food, on water. In late January, there were 150 patients there who were too sick to move outside of the hospital. The emergency room is still open, but it can't accommodate a large influx of wounded. That results in strikes as Israel continues to operate in Gaza. Some other updates unrelated to the medical situation. The United Nations on Tuesday, so this was just yesterday, the U.S. vetoed the resolution that was put forward yesterday. It was a draft resolution on the Israel-Hamas war. It would have blocked a demand for an immediate the veto ended up blocking a demand for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. We knew that was going to happen. The U.S. said that they were going to veto it. 13 council members voted in favor of this draft. It was from Algeria. Britain abstained. This was the third time the United States has vetoed a draft resolution since October 7th. Washington also used its veto to block an amendment to a draft resolution in December. The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas Greenfield, signaled that the U.S. would veto because the U.S. is concerned it will jeopardize talks between the U.S., Egypt, Israel, and Qatar on the potential of a pause and hostage exchange. The U.S. is now proposing an alternative draft resolution that's calling for a temporary ceasefire in the war. And it also says that it would oppose a major ground offensive in Rafah, according to text that was seen by Reuters. So there is a U.S. alternative. This is the first time the U.S. has used the word ceasefire, which is quite significant. Some other updates in terms of hostages, which we are certainly calling for their immediate return. But the far-right finance minister, Smotrich, said that returning Israeli hostages held by Hamas in Gaza is not the most important objective of the war. He said that statements calling for their release at any cost are wrong and irresponsible, and the only way to secure captives' return is to apply increased military pressure on Hamas. Qatar has claimed it's received confirmation from Hamas that there are medicines meant for hostages that have been delivered to them. This comes 2 days after a source of the EU told Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, that they assisted in bringing medicines to hostages that still remain alive. There's about 100 according to reports, but it's not known if all 100 are still alive. Senior U.S. official Brett McGurk is currently en route to the Middle East, where he is supposed to continue work on the hostage deal. And a Hamas delegation headed by the political bureau chief, Ismail Hanania, arrived in Cairo to hold talks with senior Egyptian officials about the war in Gaza. It's been reported by a Saudi newspaper that the head of the Hamas military wing, Yahya Sinwar, recently fled to Egypt through tunnels in Rafah, and there are fears or concerns that he maybe took Israeli hostages with him. A senior Israeli Defense Forces official denied that report, saying they have no information on that, but that has been in the news. The World Health Organization said it completed a second evacuation mission from Gaza's Nasser hospital, transferring a total of 32 critical patients, including children from the site. That's the hospital that I began this report with. And the World Food Program said it is pausing the delivery of aid to the north. Gaza in the north, there's a very small population that remains there, but that is the place that is the most affected, that is the most vulnerable for famine. And the World Food Program is pausing delivery of aid until it can be done safely. According to the UN agency, there have been attacks by civilians on distribution trucks. Now, we've heard that has happened because people are so desperate. When delivery trucks come, they're often raided and people take from the trucks before they can get to where they're allocated to be. Britain's Prince William called for an end to the fighting and said too many people have been killed in the conflict. It's unusual for the palace in Britain to speak into such political issues, but Prince William has called for an end to the fighting in Gaza. And according to the health ministry in Gaza, the death toll is now 29,195 Palestinians and 69,028 wounded in Gaza. There still continues to be significant concern about Rafah and an Israeli invasion into Rafah and what will happen to the population there. I mentioned several days ago, the Sinai Foundation for Human Rights had published a report with images showing Egyptian authorities starting rapid construction in the border area of eastern Sinai. Human rights organizations have stated that the establishment of the buffer zone is being built on land forcibly emptied from its indigenous Egyptian population. That's according to Al-Quds magazine. But a contractor and engineer were interviewed by the Times, and they provided photos of what they've been building. And it seems to be a 5-meter high concrete wall that's about 16 feet to close off an area that's 5 square kilometers. And they began working on it at the beginning of February. But this most significant concern is that for overflow? Are the Rafah border, is it going to be open or overrun, particularly if there's a ground invasion? And of course, the most significant concern is the killing of civilians as a result of that ground invasion. I mentioned yesterday about concerns related to Ramadan, particularly concerns about escalations from Jewish nationalists and Muslim worshippers during Ramadan. Hamas has said that if there are restrictions placed on the entry of worshippers to the Al-Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan, that it will blow up in the face of the occupation. They warned Israel about having an adventure in Rafah, and they attacked Prime Minister Netanyahu for arguing that hostages could be released by force. In the West Bank, there have been concerns about settler violence. There were settlers who were believed to have entered into a Palestinian village near Ramallah called Burqa last night, Tuesday night, and set Palestinian cars on fire. This came after an Israeli was wounded on Monday evening when an explosive device was thrown at a vehicle near the village. That's according to the Israeli Defense Forces report. Escalations continue at the border with Hezbollah and Lebanon. We know that there are more than 100,000 Israelis who are still displaced from around the Gaza border, but also the Lebanese border. And we know that there are also tens of thousands displaced from South Lebanon as those escalations have continued. There are concerns about humanitarian assistance just not getting into Gaza. And I can talk about that more in coming days, but the delivery of aid has continued to be quite difficult. Oxfam reported that most assistance is unable to go beyond Rafah or Khan Yunis, leaving critical needs unmet in Gaza City and further in the north. And then the International Court of Justice is meeting this week to determine and come up with a valuation on the occupation of the Palestinian people. That's set to continue throughout the week. And South Africa said yesterday that it had lodged an urgent request to the ICJ to consider whether Israel's military operations targeting Rafah breached provincial orders that were handed down last month. The ICJ had called for immediate and effective implementation of provisional measures when it ordered Israel to take steps within its power to ensure that genocidal acts are not being committed. However, the court does not demand the indication of additional provisional measures. Israel has until this Friday to submit their report that was required by the ICJ, providing details of what it's done to comply with the measures that were put forward by the court. So that's news from the ICJ. There's lots of other things that I could share about in terms of, we talked some about regional escalations. There's a conversation at the United Nations about the treatment of Palestinian women and girls in Gaza. Experts have expressed serious concern about the arbitrary detention of hundreds of Palestinian women and girls, including human rights defenders, journalists, and humanitarian workers. According to reports, many have been subjected to inhumane and degrading treatment, denied menstruation pads, food and medicine, and severely beaten. And so there are investigations about that. You may recall that there were similar or concerns about the use of sexual violence on October 7th by Hamas, where there was an outcry because in large part, the United Nations didn't respond and said that they would investigate those claims. So claims for both Israeli women and Palestinian women are now on the table. And finally, in Yemen, Houthis shot down a U.S. drone on Monday morning. I think I reported about that already, but things are continuing to escalate at the Houthis in Yemen have not been deterred by the attacks from the US and the UK, seeking to end those escalations. So that's an update for today. Today is the day that the group that's traveling from Philadelphia to DC arrive. I will be with that group in spirit. There's a vigil that'll be happening, welcoming them after their journey as they've diligently progressed and are calling for a ceasefire, a comprehensive ceasefire where every party would lay down their arms and negotiated settlements could be pursued.